So where we left off was this guy here. Now we've got everything set up. We've got the boss kind of where we want it to be. And we've got a couple of holes, although we're going to have to clean them up in here. You can see that we still have a couple of faces that we need to take care of. But we also need to add the holes for the screwdriver bit. One thing you can do is, and I showed you guys this before with planes, is that you can show them with the eyeball. Well, the same thing can apply for sketches. So we're just going to come down to this sketch and we're going to show those two sketches. So now that we have some of the geometry that we can refer to. Now, if you're creating another sketch on a face or something like that, referring to other geometry in the boss isn't necessarily the best. I generally try to refer first to geometry that already exists, like planes and origins and possibly a line or a sketch that gives us the rough geometry. Then I will reference other sketches. And finally, worst case scenarios is you reference something like a boss. So generally, as a rule, you always want to refer to, again, to origins, planes, then to sketches, and then to bosses, because faces and stuff can cause issues with CAD. Let's just hit the F key, get it to zoom out. Now we need a hole here for our hex bits, that face there. So you can select on that face, and you don't have to have a plane to sketch on. In this case, you can select a face and sketch on it. Key thing here is that I can't create a sketch on this rounded face because it is not a plane. So if you just select that one face there and see if we can sketch. And it's going to ask me for a sketch plane. In other words, it didn't recognize that as a plane that we can use. So let's exit out of that. Now let's select the face of the boss and we're going to hit sketch and it'll immediately go into the sketch. We're going to go to the right view. Now what we're going to do is we need a tool hole for the screwdriver bit on one side and then a reverse one on the other side. So we're going to come back in here again. We're going to do an inscribe polygon like we did before. You can come in and you'll notice that it is referencing that origin for giving me the hole, but it's not referencing the center point of that other sketch. It's a little bit of a pain, but that's okay. We can work with this. So let's just draw a hex out from here, like this direction. And we're going to have it with 6 like we did before. But now you'll notice that I can select that point. I can select this point and we can make them coincident, or I can hit the I key. This hex is in the same center as this circle. So that circle and that circle are concentric with each other. Earlier I was showing you guys that you could take this and make it horizontal, and we know that this line up here is horizontal. You could do the horizontal, but what if at some point in time this model gets moved around, it's no longer horizontal, it's slightly off, it might cause some issues. So we want that line to be in reference to this geometry. So we're going to select on that face there, and instead of saying make them horizontal, we're going to make them parallel. So now that we got them parallel, this thing isn't going to be able to rotate around. I can make it larger and smaller, but I'm not going to be able to rotate it around. So the last thing that we need to do is get the hole size correct and for a 3D printer. Now I've had some luck with experimentation and worked it out that 6.7 millimeters is perfect for this. And now you'll notice the sketch is all black, and that's exactly what we want to have. As soon as you have an all black sketch, it means it's fully constrained. It's not kind of going anywhere. So now we've got all that set up. Let's rotate around. Now we need to cut this out of that boss. So let's zoom out a little bit. I'm going to hide that first sketch because we don't really need to see that. Now we're going to do an extrude based off of that sketch. But in this case, we're going to hit remove. Let's just zoom this out, or let's just hit the F key so that we have the depth. We can actually see how deep it's going to go, and you can see the plane where it's actually going. So if you catch a better view, in this case, we're going to go for a top view, and it's showing us where this guy is going to extrude to. We don't want him to be that deep. Usually you can grab onto that arrow and drag it. Now the depth that we want here is 16.5 millimeters. At least that's what's worked well for me. And we're going to hit OK. And you'll notice that it's created that hole in there exactly where I want it to be. We want to have that on the other side, the reverse opposite side. Now we could try to mirror it, but it's just going to end up creating a hole all the way through and not one to the opposite side here that we need it to be. So in this case, we're going to go back into one of the old sketches and we're going to add a line, and I'll explain why here in a second. So we're going to go to the first sketch. We're going to hit edit. We're going to make a line. We're going to make a construction line, and we're going to base it off of the origin, and we're going to bring it straight up. So now we have a nice clean vertical line coming straight up. I'm going to exit out of the sketch, and that line is going to come in super handy now. So let's show this sketch. Now what we can do is we can pattern We can do a circular pattern. You can do linear patterns, but we can do a circular pattern. And we're going to do a pattern. Up in here, you'll notice that it's a part pattern. So it's going to say, hey, do you want to pattern this over and over again? We don't want to pattern the part in this case. We want to pattern a feature. And that feature is the last extrude that we had. So now we have the features to pattern. Now the last thing we need is the axis of the pattern. So we want to know where we need to rotate this around. And this is where, remember I was telling you earlier to make everything nice and symmetric if you can? This is a perfect example of why you want to do that. Oops, so now it's thinking that we need to pattern the sketch, and that isn't the case. If it's orange, it's not highlighted, it's not what you're actually working in. So click down into that axis of pattern, and we're going to select on that guy. Now you'll notice that it's saying that it's going to pattern it 4 times. And you can see that it shows up here, which is great. But the problem with that is that it's going to try and make some other holes in different areas. And that's not what we necessarily want here. This thing's not rotating the way I want it to. So what we want is an angle 360 degrees. So within 360 degrees, we want 2 instances, and we want an equal spacing. So we're just going to hit return. Now we're going to rotate this part around, and you'll notice that that circular pattern has created that next hole right there as a nice pattern. So it saves us having to sketch and create something over again. Here's something that comes up all the time with me is I've just done this and I realized that there's something else that I wanted. Now when you put those bits in there, being able to put a little hole in the back of this so you can push those bits out should you not want it. Right now it's a really nice tight press fit, but I wanted to be able to remove those bits. So in this case, I'd want to do the hole, but then I'd have to do the circular pattern again. Having to redo stuff and making this tree really big is a bit of a pain. So in this case, I'm going to click on this rollback bar. I'm going to roll back to the extrude that I did for that one cut. Now you'll see that the pattern has gone missing. So let's just get rid of this sketch here. And now we're back to where we were before the circular pattern. I want a hole all the way through here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch on that face there. You don't necessarily have to sketch on every face like this, but this is a good way to do it. I'm going to hit N, which will take us normal to the view that we have. Now remember I was telling you before, you can always hit this cube up here for different views, like say the back. Now if I'm in a sketch and I try to sketch, it's not going to show up here because we're kind of at 90 degrees to it. But if I hit the N key, one of the shortcut keys, it will take me to that. So now that we have that, we need a point, and I'm going to show you how to use the hole features. So now there's a couple ways that we want this hole to be perfectly centered in here. One thing that we can do is I'm just going to drop a point somewhere in there. And that's what we're going to use for the hole feature, but you'll notice that it's blue. So there's a couple things that we can do in this case, is that we can show that one other sketch, and we can say take that point, and we can make them coincident. That's one way you can do it. Sometimes it's really hard to drill down and figure exactly where that sketch is and everything. So let's just look at a different way that we can go about doing this. We're going to create a line. We're going to make it construction geometry. And we're going to go from that point to that point. And now we have a fully black construction line. But that also gives us the opportunity to click on this point here, that line, and we can make them so that they're midpoint. So now that dot is perfectly in the center of this guy here. And that's exactly what we want. So we're going to exit out of that, and we've got this sketch down on that one face. Next thing we're going to do here is we want to create a hole. We're going to do a 5mm hole, should be okay. And sketch points to place the holes. So we can find that sketch point that we just created. We're going to click on it, and you see that it made the hole all the way through the part. Now you can say you want to make it a certain depth or a certain width. You can make a tapped hole. You can do simple holes or counterbores, countersinks, all this other stuff. I recommend you go in and kind of play around with it and take a look at things, but in this case, I wouldn't worry too much about that. That hole looks a little too big to me, so let's just make that a 3mm hole. And merge scope. So let's say we have multiple bodies or multiple parts within this document. You could select on different parts to actually get the hole. So if the hole went through, say, 2 different parts, you can choose which ones that hole merges with. Let's exit out of this, and now we've got that hole, we've got that sketch. Let's go back and take the rollback bar and roll it back to the end. So now you'll notice that the hole, zoom out, you'll notice that the hole is fine through that one, but it didn't mirror it here because on the circular pattern, we had made it so that we only select that one extrude. So in this case, we come in and we're going to hit edit, and you can say features the pattern. Let's come in and select this other feature, this hole feature. And you can see the hole came in. and now it's patterned around as well. So now we've got everything nice and clean and everything set up exactly the way we want it. And for the most part, this part is pretty much where we want it to be, but we want to clean it up a little bit. So, and the reason why we want to clean it up is for 3D printing, sharp edges and stuff don't print necessarily all that well. And you don't want something sharp along your wrist. So in this case, we want to fillet it, or we want to make some nice round edges. So let's figure out which entities to fillet. But in this case, I'm just going to guess at 1 millimeter for a radius. And we're going to start selecting some edges and seeing how it looks. So let's select the first one. You can see that it's made that nice and round. So let's select that. And that's great. So we can select all these edges one at a time and go through and get it this way. But this can be really arduous coming in and selecting all these edges. One thing you can also do is, I'm going to flip this over, is you can select a face. And so long as the face has edges that it can fillet, it'll go through and do all of that. So instead of selecting those 4 edges, I only selected that face and it took care of things. What I'm going to do is, this case, I want to put chamfers in on this. Chamfers work better for when you're trying to push a part into a piece. And I want a chamfer there. So if I select on this face to add that fillet, it will work, but I don't want those rounded edges. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, there are certain circumstances that selecting edges work better, and some circumstances work better for selecting faces. So let's grab those faces, or sorry, grab those edges. Go to the other side, grab those edges. Now we've got that fillet done. Now in some cases it's best to do one fillet then come in and do another. In this case, what I'm going to do is see how much of this I can get done in one hit. So one thing that's kind of neat is you have tangent propagation. What tangent propagation means is that if I select on this line is tangent to that circle. So it's going to continue the fillet all the way around. So this will save you some mouse clicks. So we select on that and you notice that it caught that whole edge. And I'm going to do the same to the back side. You don't necessarily have to be facing it to select these things. And we're going to see how this works. I'm going to select on that little edge there. Let's see if it tangent propagates around. Okay, so now you can see that it's trying to do the tangent propagation, but this red line is telling me that that fillet's not going to work on there. So let's just deselect that one edge. We'll let all these fillets work, and this is generally a good spot to stop doing that one fillet command. You want to maybe get as much as you can done in one hit, but in this case, that is all we can do. Now we're going to create another fillet, and we're going to see if we can fillet that out, and we want this to be 1 millimeter, just like the last time. Now this is something that's kind of strange about a lot of CAD systems, is that fillets will work sometimes not entirely in one fillet. Sometimes it, like you saw earlier, that fillet was just not playing properly, but I can get out of that fillet command, come in and create those fillets that I wanted just by making it a separate sort of entity or a separate feature. So let's come in here and we will get this last edge. So now we got everything nicely rounded out the way we want it to with 1 millimeter, and everything looks pretty cool. Now I wanted to add a chamfer to the holes. So again, this is something where you come in for a chamfer. The entities to chamfer, I'll grab that in a second, but again, we'll do 1 millimeter for this, and we'll have tangent propagation if we need it, but we don't in this case. So we're going to grab these faces. Now, I suppose you could make these fillets as well and grab the faces, but that isn't necessarily going to make it easy for me to instruct you guys on how exactly to do all this. So we've got that one, this guy here with the chamfer, and that 1 millimeter seems a little big. So we're just going to do 0.5 millimeters. So we don't need that much of an edge. And we'll do the same for all the holes. Now you could do a circular pattern all the way around and get all these pieces done in one sort of hit. In this case, it's just a few mouse clicks. I'm just going to take those few mouse clicks and actually cut through here. And this has also reminded me about one thing that we need to take care of here. Rotate around. Okay, so now we've got all those chamfers in there where we want, and we're going to hit the OK key, and we're good. Now for the most part, we have the part exactly where we want it. Now this is one thing I recommend everybody does, is come in and rotate the model around, because while I was rotating around doing the fillets, I realized that These holes I want to be through holes. You can come in and try to fix everything and try to fill everything in as far as those other pieces go. But what I'm going to do in this case is that we have this one sketch. It's already there. I'm going to show that sketch. Now I'm going to do another extrude, but I'm going to extrude the faces or sketch regions. In this case is this sketch region. Now I can't get at that sketch. It's not letting me kind of select anything on that sketch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here. Now remember how you can hide things? Here's a perfect example of where it can come in super handy. So I can hide that body. Now I can come in and go, hey, I want that hole and that hole. I want to remove them from the part. I want it to be symmetric. And in this case, you know, we can add in some arbitrary 40 because there is no through all. Now let's just show that part again. So it's going to cut through all of this. The merge scope, it's asking where it wants or what we want it to cut through. We're going to say okay there. So in this example, now we have through holes all the way through exactly what we want. This is a perfect example of, don't think that that sketch, just because you used it for this feature, is stuck to that. You can use it later on. You can make use of it by showing it and creating the part and modifying the part as you need. So here we go. We've got that part. First piece done. And next thing we're going to work on is the links.